So I ran 15 miles this morning, and I was thinking about reading to you from the running portions of this book because of that, but they're very descriptive heavy. And listening to a reading, descriptive heavy passages tend to sort of lull you into a trance where, like Tom described, you're like floating above and you're kind of detached from. So I decided to go with a little more action, conflict, confrontation, drama. It should be exciting, at least I hope so. So let me tell you a little bit about the book to set this up. It comes towards the end, about 3/4 of the way through or so. The book is largely about growing up and about the difficulty and pain and loss and confusion that often accompanies growing up. And one of the things that obsessed me when I was a younger writer was what it means to be an adult. And the reason it obsessed me was because it seemed like such an easy question that I should know the answer to, and every answer that I provided always seemed inadequate. I would sort of come up with a theory and then try to apply it to the people around me. You know, there are some 19-year-olds who are very adult. There are some 50-year-olds who are not. And every time I came up with a theory, I would try to apply it to people, and it didn't seem to quite describe or predict who seemed like adults and who didn't. So the question sort of tumbled on in my mind. And one answer that I finally came to, I don't know if it's adequate, but that adults, you become adult not when you reach a certain age or when you become independent or when you take responsibility for yourself, but when you take responsibility for others. And this is an idea that appealed to me, not because it was, graceful or elegant or anything like that, but because it was a really difficult and complicated dynamic. To take care of others is a complicated and fraught dynamic. And it raises all kinds of other questions, such as, what do we owe to others, and what do we owe to ourselves to stay true to ourselves? What do others owe to us? What do others need, and how can we tell? What do we need, and where do these forces come into conflict? So a lot of this book explores those conflicts, explores the places where these needs and desires are complex or contradictory, and the action sort of traces the fallout of those contradictions, those dynamics, those difficulties. So the section that I'm going to read to you today is when these questions sort of come to a head in the action. Some information you need to know to understand the scene is that the narrator, whose voice I'll be reading in, Ed, he's a college sophomore who's just left college because basically his life has fallen apart. He's been kicked out of his apartment. He has hurt people, and he's suffered. And from this suffering and this infliction of suffering on others, he sort of realized that there's more out there than just fulfilling your own needs. And he started thinking a little bit more about others. And that has led him back to his own family, where he's trying to apply this new understanding to sort of reconnect with his own family that has also fallen apart. His mother, as he left for college, left the family for another woman and moved across the country, and that left Ed, his father, and his younger brother, who's a middle schooler, feeling very abandoned. Let's see. The little brother used to be a basketball prodigy. He was always really tall. In this passage, by now, he's actually much taller than Ed, despite being a lot younger. Has sort of slipped into drugs and delinquency. And Ed's father has charged Ed with talking to his brother to straighten him out, which sort of fits into Ed's idea that, maybe there's more out there than just caring about what I want. Maybe it's time for me to take responsibility for someone else. And so in this scene, we see him trying to take responsibility for his brother, and we see how that can be a fraught and dangerous and risky proposition. Okay. The next day, I was in the garage. I should mention, the house is broken, literally and metaphorically. I mean, it's in disrepair, messy, so Ed has been cleaning up. The next day, I was in the garage, using the vacuum's extension nozzle to suck up the drifts of dust that had collected behind the furnace and water heater when I thought I heard the front door close. It was just after lunch, and nobody should have been home for another few hours. I turned off the vacuum and heard footsteps, then voices. When I entered through the laundry room, Charlie was standing at the pantry with a boy so much shorter and younger looking that it took me a moment to realize that they were probably the same age. The other boy's eyebrow was pierced, his ears peeking through a curtain of lank brown hair. He glanced over, looking sedated, as if nothing in the world could possibly surprise him, least of all me. "What are you doing here?" I asked Charlie, who was studiously ignoring me. "Getting a snack." "Don't you have school?" "Don't you?" I thought I explained that. "So did I." "Jackpot," the other kid said in a surprisingly deep voice. He pulled down a bag of Oreos, and they trudged upstairs, the pantry doors still hanging open. For a moment, I considered waiting for my father to come home and letting him handle it. But that felt like a double betrayal. I would betray Charlie by tattling, and my father by adding another burden when I'd promised to shoulder some of it myself. I closed the pantry doors and headed upstairs. Through the doorway, I could see Charlie leaning over a bureau drawer, rummaging through the mess inside. The friend stood in the corner watching, hands in his pockets, back slumped. When I knocked to announce myself, Charlie slammed the drawer and faced me, raising himself to his full height. "Did you mess with my stuff?" he said. "Just the laundry." "Were you in my room?" "Just for the laundry," I repeated, unable to keep the irritation out of my voice. His was the only room I'd stayed away from, not wanting to make things worse by invading his privacy. I'd been dying to pull the curtains, open a window, let fresh air and natural light flood the room. I thought he might have appreciated this restraint, along with the stacks of fresh laundry that had appeared in his closet. I shot a quick glance at the friend, who gazed back with sleepy amusement. There would always be a reason to avoid our talk, I decided, and to delay it any longer felt the same as delaying it forever. "Like I told you yesterday," I said, trying to ignore the friend, "I'm here because I made some mistakes. What I've realized is that most of them have come from the same thing, not thinking about other people enough. Now I'm trying to do better and get my life back in order." Charlie was watching me warily, as if he knew the trick I was pulling. "You should be doing the same," I told him. "If you think Dad treats you differently, it's only because he's worried about you, and I don't blame him. Do you have any idea what you're doing to his heart? What if he keeled over one day? How would you feel then? If you want him to treat you better, maybe you should try doing the same for him. Maybe you should try taking other people into consideration once in a while." "Maybe I would if he didn't treat me like crap." "He's trying to help you, Charlie. We both are." "No, you're not. All you ever do is criticize me, just like you're doing right now, and then you leave. You try to act like you're there for me, but you aren't. You never are." "I'm here now." "You're here because you don't have anywhere else to go. You just said that. You're here for yourself. Stop trying to act all high and mighty like you know what's best for me. You don't." When I didn't respond, he exchanged glances with the friend, as if apologizing for the interruption. The friend gave a look that said it was okay, but couldn't he wrap it up? Charlie opened the bureau drawer again. "Get out of my room." "What about you?" I said. "When have you ever been there for me?" "I never left," he said, rummaging again. "You're the one who left." "The day Mom told us she was leaving, I needed you to come look for London with me, and you wouldn't do it. The day I told you about Sequoia College, I needed you to help me work on a new move, like I've done 1,000 times for you, but you said you didn't feel like it. When I needed you to come play basketball with me and my friends, you had to go get high first. I don't have to play basketball if I don't want to. What about what I want? Have you ever taken that into account?" He found what he'd been searching for in the drawer, palmed it, then turned to face me. "Why should I?" "Because I'm your brother." "Well, then maybe you should try taking into account what I want. You're always trying to force me to play basketball, but I don't like basketball. I'm not like you. I don't want to be like you." As if to illustrate the point, he revealed the small film canister he was palming, popped its lid, and extracted a slender white joint. One end was tapered, the other black with ash. Before I could say anything, he produced a lighter from his pocket, then offered both to me. But even if I wasn't already suspended in the thin fissure between anger and self-control, even if I wasn't already convinced he was only mocking me, even if I hadn't been laughed at the last time I'd accepted a joint, even if I wanted to try it, what did Charlie expect me to do? Take it from him, ask for instructions, and then sit there getting high in the middle of the day with my little brother and some kid I didn't know, both of whom should have been in school? Here, he said, jabbing the joint and lighter at me. Here, Ed, take it, be like me. The friend snickered, and that cleared up any remaining doubt about whether Charlie had meant the offer in earnest. Annoying, he said, isn't it? I reached for the joint, not to smoke, but to confiscate it, and Charlie, recognizing my intentions, recoiled. Give it, I said, turning my palm up. No, you're going to take it. You're damn right I am. Someone needs to. It's disgusting. You're disgusting. Would you look at this place? What happened to you? He responded with a smile, then sat on the bed and calmly placed the joint between his lips. He gave me a long look of bitterness and hostility, as if daring me to do something about it, before spinning the flint and raising the flame. His eyes dipped briefly as he lit the tip, then came back up, and he kept them locked on mine as he took a long drag. Without thinking, I stepped forward and slapped it from his mouth. The joint flew sideways onto the carpet, and at first, Charlie's face was only shocked. Then it sharpened into rage. He bolted up and came at me. I caught one of his shoulders and one of his wrists, and we grappled, wagging our elbows, pushing and twisting, resetting our feet, straightening and reversing ourselves, stumbling around the room until we slammed the bureau and our hands flew apart. With jabs and deflections, we reached for each other again. This time, Charlie got his arms inside mine, his big hands clenching my collar and pulling the fabric tight around my shoulders and neck, and I could only loop my arms around the outside and hold my brother's sleeves like handlebars as I backpedaled, being driven across the room. When I slammed the wall, the whole house seemed to shake. Charlie's face was pointed down at mine, nostrils flaring, lips peeled from gritted teeth. It felt strange to look up at my little brother. I tried to struggle free, but he was too strong. He shook me and then slammed me into the wall again, and this time my head knocked the plaster. Something banged to the floor in another room, and my vision swam. I could smell his sour breath as he hollered, "You think you get to waltz back in here whenever you want and tell me what to do?" He drove me slipping and stumbling through the doorway and threw me to the hall floor. When I struggled up, he pressed a knee into my spine and drove me back down, twice, until I lay there on my stomach, no longer resisting. "Okay," I said. "You win." The weight of his knee released. I turned over and saw him in the doorway, legs splayed, arms flared, leaning forward as if to meet another collision. "You don't live here anymore," he shouted, jabbing his finger at me. "You don't have a say in anything." I looked at the long finger, the ponderous hand, the adult's face furrowed with hostility. My shoulder hurt where it had slammed the wall. I was dizzy and my head throbbed. My collar was stretched halfway down my chest and a seam in my sleeve was torn. "I can't help you if you won't let me," I told him, standing up. "I don't need your help." "Oh, yes, you do. Just stay away from me." He went to pick the joint off the carpet and stamp out the fibers it had singed. When he saw me standing there, he came back and kicked the door shut. On the other side, the friend said something, and Charlie laughed. I stood there for several long moments, looking at the grain of the door's veneer until my eyes burned. I'm going to finish out the chapters, just maybe 4 more minutes. Charlie and his friend were long gone by the time my father got home. I was sitting over a tumbler of whiskey, trying to dull the awful feeling of the fight. I kept thinking about how big and powerful Charlie had become, and what a waste it was for him to squander those gifts bullying me and my father, rather than putting them to good use on a basketball court. I remembered what I'd said to him. When had he ever been there for me? And I felt how true it was. I also thought about what Charlie had said, that I only ever criticized him, and I considered the possibility that my criticism had the same effect on him that my father's had on me. It had only made me resentful and defiant, even when he was right. My thoughts drifted toward my father, and I wondered if he felt the same frustration about my recent choices, basketball, Sequoia College, journalism, as I did about Charlie's. I started to wonder what the divorce had been like for him. Did he hate my mother the same way Tanya seemed to hate me? Did he admire my mother's resolve the same way I'd admired Lucien's? Was he angry at himself? Was he happy for her? These were the ideas running through my mind when he walked in. "I'll pretend I didn't see that," he said, glancing at the tumbler as he passed into the kitchen, carrying a sack of groceries. "It's not easy to build an argument for lawfulness around here if I don't apply it consistently." I drank off the rest and followed him into the kitchen. I talked to Charlie. He stopped unpacking groceries to glance at me, taking in my stretched collar, my torn sleeve, the rug burns on my cheek and forehead. I touched the goose egg on my crown, then turned to show him. "That bad, huh?" It was pretty bad. "Well," he said, reaching into the bag again, "that doesn't mean it'll have no effect. You never know how these things are going to settle once a little time has passed." "What'd you tell him exactly?" "Just that we're worried and trying to help." "What did he say?" "It's kind of a blur. I think he feels like we're trying to control him." He laughed. "It's like your granddad used to tell me, as long as you're living under my roof." He yanked the fridge open and threw in a carton of yogurt. I've just been thinking about what it's like from Charlie's perspective. I've also been thinking about what it's like from your perspective. "Trying," he said. "Very trying. I mean all of it. Are you happy for Mom, or do you hate her, or what?" In the hesitation that followed, there was a barrier between us that hadn't been there a moment earlier. "I don't think I'm ready to talk about that yet," he said. "Sorry," I said. "Not a problem," he said. He gave me a tight smile, and I gave one back, but it was clear we could both feel the new space between us. I searched for another topic to cover up the gaffe, but I couldn't think of anything except the private sorrows we all preferred to nurture in secrecy. So we just stood there, locked in tense, uncomfortable smiles, until my father said, "I just remembered something I have to do." A moment later, his office door clicked shut. Thank you.